London awoke beneath a veil of pale winter light, the kind that softened rooftops yet sharpened judgments, and Miss Evelyn Harcourt felt each cold breath of the morning as though it carried another whispered reminder of her dwindling place in the world. The carriage wheels rattled along Grosvenor Square, bearing her toward Lady Rathbourne's tea-gathering, a trivial event for the fortunate, but a battlefield for the quietly disregarded. Evelyn held her gloves tightly, steadying the tremor in her hands. She had not been invited for admiration. She had been summoned out of obligation, the kind extended to those who linger at the edges of society like faint pencil marks awaiting erasure. Inside the drawing-room, warmth and the scent of crushed rose petals mingled with the more merciless fragrance of social rivalry. Evelyn moved with practiced grace, though her pale blue gown, carefully repaired at the seams, betrayed the truth of her family's declining means. Conversations swelled like tides around her, silvery laughter, clinking porcelain, the rustle of silk skirts, but no voice beckoned her forward. She took her place near a mantelpiece crowded with porcelain shepherdesses whose painted smiles seemed to mock her solitude. A group of young ladies nearby glanced toward her and then leaned together, their whispers fluttering through the air with the precision of poisoned arrows. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed on the fire, praying that indifference might shield her from the sting of curiosity. She knew better. Nothing invited cruelty faster than a woman attempting to disappear. Her fragile composure fractured when Lady Rathbourne herself approached carrying a small silver tray of letters meant for amusement, each envelope drawn anonymously from a decorative bowl containing seasonal sentiments. The hostess, notorious for masking cruelty with charm, paused before Evelyn. "My dear Miss Harcourt, how delightful," she said, selecting a pale envelope addressed in a bold masculine hand. "A gentleman has taken notice of you after all." The words, spoken sweetly, carried an unmistakable undertone, astonishment that anyone would. A ripple of interest swept through the room. Evelyn forced a polite smile and opened the letter, only to feel the blood drain from her cheeks. It was not a sentiment. It was a rejection written by her former suitor, returned unopened for months before, its meaning now laid bare before dozens of watchful eyes. Soft laughter prickled her skin as Lady Rathbourne plucked the letter from Evelyn's trembling fingers and read a line aloud. Something about incompatibility and lack of spark. A few gasps followed, a few smirks accompanied them. Evelyn's vision wavered as if heat were rising from the polished floor. She backed away, too aware of her solitude, of how quickly the room had become a stage on which she played the unwilling clown. Someone murmured that even the post had conspired against her. Another suggested that the Duke of Ashbourne, recently arrived, must be relieved she had not set her sights on him. The cruelty was casual, effortless, and perfectly timed to shatter her remaining dignity. She reached the doorway, desperate for air, for escape, for anything that might save her from the vice tightening around her heart. The corridor beyond offered little comfort, only dim light, muted carpets, and the steady thrum of humiliation echoing in her ears. Evelyn pressed a hand against the wall, breathing slowly, trying to gather what remained of her composure. Footsteps approached from behind, measured and unmistakably masculine. She straightened instinctively, smoothing her gown though the gesture felt futile. When she turned, she found herself before the Duke of Ashbourne. Tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying the cool gravity of a man accustomed to command, he regarded her with an expression neither pitying nor distant, but calculating, as though the scene he had witnessed had presented him with an unexpected solution to a private dilemma. His eyes, a deep gray like storm-touched steel, lingered on the discarded letter still clutched in her trembling hand. "Miss Harcourt," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying none of the brittle amusement that had filled the drawing-room. "If I may be so bold, the cruelty of others often reveals far more about their desperation than about your worth." His words, unexpected and disarming, nearly unraveled her renewed attempt at composure. She offered a faint curtsy, murmuring that she required no sympathy, but he shook his head slightly, as though dismissing the very concept. "I do not offer sympathy," he replied. "I offer clarity." Something in his tone suggested urgency, as if the humiliation she had endured had granted him permission to approach her with a proposition he would not voice under more polite circumstances. Evelyn sensed a shift, subtle yet undeniable, as though the quiet corridor had tightened around them, sealing them briefly from the world's scrutiny. Her humiliation had not vanished, but it had transformed, leaving in its place a trembling curiosity she dared not name. The Duke stepped closer, though not enough to breach propriety, his presence nonetheless radiating a focused intensity that made her breath falter. "You deserve better than their mockery," he said. "And I—" He stopped, considering his next words with unusual care. "I find myself in need of someone whose dignity does not depend on society's approval." Evelyn blinked, uncertain whether she had heard him correctly. He looked at her then, fully, with a resolve that unsettled and steadied her all at once. He extended his hand slightly, not to touch her, but to invite her attention. "Miss Harcourt, forgive the abruptness, but your misfortune has granted me clarity of my own. I believe we may be of service to one another." His words hovered in the chilled air. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with a disorienting sense that the path of her life had begun to tilt. "What service do you speak of, Your Grace?" she asked. He studied her for a long, waited moment, then allowed a rare, almost imperceptible smile to form. "A proposal," he said softly, "but not the kind you might expect." The Duke's proposal lingered between them like a wisp of winter breath, visible for a moment, then dissolving into air, leaving Evelyn unsure whether she had imagined its shape. Yet his gaze held a gravity that dispelled doubt. He escorted her toward a quieter room at the edge of the corridor, a small antechamber draped in damask and warmed by a solitary lamp. Its light cast soft amber across his features, revealing a tension that did not belong to a man indulging whimsy but to one wrestling necessity. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The door clicked shut behind them, muting the distant swell of laughter from the tea gathering. Her humiliation, though still sharp, had been eclipsed by curiosity. She had been invisible for so long that the Duke's attention felt almost unreal, like a dream conjured from desperation. He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, the very picture of aristocratic composure. "Miss Harcourt," he began, "the estate of Ashbourne is presently ensnared in a dispute. My uncle seeks to undermine my authority by portraying me as reckless, unsuitable, and lacking the stability required of my position. He intends to use the Christmas ball, the most public stage of the season, to humiliate me." His voice held that measured control of a man accustomed to ruling his emotions, but a flicker of something darker betrayed the pressure beneath. "Rumors are already being whispered. The only means of silencing them is to present myself as a man soon to be settled in marriage." Evelyn absorbed this, stunned not by the nature of his predicament but by the direction his logic seemed to lead. "You wish to convince society you are engaged," she said softly, the words tasting fragile on her tongue. "I do," he answered. "And I require someone whose reputation is unblemished, whose conduct is unimpeachable, and who has no ambition to entangle herself in my affairs beyond this singular event." His eyes held hers, a steady, searching regard that made her feel momentarily exposed. "You were not chosen because you are convenient," he added, as if sensing her doubt. "You were chosen because you possess a dignity that cannot be feigned. Even under attack, you held yourself with grace." The compliment, spoken without decoration, carried unexpected weight. Evelyn felt a warmth rise in her chest, though she attempted to steady herself. "And what would you ask of me?" she murmured. He stepped closer, but not intimately so. His presence merely illuminated the seriousness of his offer. "I ask you to pose as my intended at the Christmas ball," he said. "Only for that night. No more." The enormity of the request settled around her like falling snow, soft in appearance yet heavy in substance. She opened her lips to speak, but he lifted a hand, stopping her. "There is one condition," he said. "A rule that must be respected above all else." His voice deepened. "You must show no affection that is not required by the role. No gestures that might mislead either of us into believing this arrangement carries sentiment." The words, so precise and carefully delivered, struck her with a strange pang. It was a boundary meant to protect them both, yet it implied a vulnerability he refused to acknowledge. Evelyn nodded slowly, though uncertainty stirred within her. She had long been dismissed as unremarkable. The idea that she might be drawn into a charade of affection felt both daunting and thrilling. "Why me?" she asked, unable to silence the tremor of insecurity in her voice. "You have wealth, power, and influence. You could have chosen anyone." The Duke's expression remained unreadable. "Precisely why I did not," he replied. "Those who seek power would use this arrangement to ensnare me. You will not." She looked away, humbled and conflicted. "You presume much about my intentions." He shook his head. "I observe." Before she could reply, he withdrew a small velvet box from his coat. The gesture, though simple, bore the air of ceremony. He extended it toward her. "This must accompany the deception," he said. Evelyn opened the box with slow deliberation. Inside lay a necklace of old Ashbourne craftsmanship, a delicate arrangement of pearls encircling a single teardrop pearl framed by filigreed gold. It shimmered like captured moonlight. She inhaled sharply. "This is far too valuable," she whispered. "Its value," the Duke said, "is precisely why people will believe we are to be wed." She touched the necklace lightly, feeling its cool surface. It was beautiful, achingly so, and yet unsettling. A token meant to bind her to an illusion. Before she could form an objection, a voice rang from the hallway, high, mocking, unmistakably triumphant. "The Duke of Ashbourne closeted with Miss Harcourt? How intriguing!" Lady Rathbourne's words sliced through the door, followed by hushed giggles and retreating footsteps. Evelyn's breath caught. The Duke's jaw tightened. "It begins," he said, half to himself. "The whispers will take flight now, twisting into whatever suits them." Her humiliation at the tea-gathering now threatened to unravel into full scandal. She clutched the velvet box reflexively, as though it might shield her. "I had not meant to drag you into a storm so swiftly," he uttered. "But perhaps this serves our arrangement. The rumor will spread faster than any announcement." Evelyn looked up, her pulse unsteady. "You assume I have agreed." He studied her, the faintest flicker of uncertainty shadowing his composure. "Have you not?" She should have said no. She should have retreated, protected what little security she still possessed. Yet the image of the laughing guests, the sharp sting of rejection, and her own longing to reclaim a fragment of dignity swirled within her. To appear desired, chosen, if only for one night, was a temptation she had no strength to resist. She drew a breath, steady but fragile. "I will do it," she said. The Duke's shoulders eased slightly, though his gaze remained cautious. "Then we are bound by our agreement," he replied. "We shall arrive at the Christmas ball together. Speak as though our engagement is decided. But remember the rule, Miss Harcourt. There must be no affection beyond what society expects." Something in his voice suggested he was reminding himself as much as her. He offered his arm to escort her back to the main corridor, but before she accepted, he added, "Be prepared. The scandal sheets move quickly. By morning, every drawing-room in London may believe our union is real." She swallowed hard, gripping the velvet box. "And what will they say of you?" she asked. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "That I am desperate, perhaps. But desperation can be useful when wielded correctly." As they stepped into the corridor, a footman rushed toward them, breathless and pale. He bowed hastily. "Your Grace," he said, "a notice has just been delivered to the household. It comes from the Morning Gazette." The Duke took the slip of paper, unfolded it, and went utterly still. Evelyn watched his expression darken, not with anger but with recognition. He handed her the paper silently. The headline, written in bold script, read, "The Duke of Ashbourne secretly engaged. Identity of the mystery lady revealed." Her name stood beneath it. Rain hammered against the tall windows of Ashbourne House as Evelyn stepped into the Duke's private library, the vast room flickering with the amber light of dozens of candles. She felt as though she had crossed a boundary that polite society would never forgive, yet the Duke's steady presence beckoned her farther. Books lined the walls like silent witnesses, and the scent of leather, smoke, and storm-touched air wrapped around her trembling breath. He closed the door with a soft click that seemed to seal them into a world untouched by the cruelty outside. For a moment neither spoke. The storm filled the silence with its relentless rhythm. Evelyn felt the weight of the Duke's gaze not as scrutiny but as an invitation to shed the last remnants of the mask she had worn since childhood. When he finally moved toward her, his steps were measured, almost hesitant, as though he feared his proximity might startle her into flight. "You are unsettled," he said quietly, though the words carried an intimacy that made her pulse flutter. Evelyn tried to respond, but her voice refused to shape itself. The storm had stolen it, or perhaps the Duke's nearness had. He gestured toward the hearth, inviting her to sit where the fire glowed brightest. She obeyed with uncertain steps, feeling the warmth seep into her chilled fingers. When he sat opposite her, the flickering light softened the angular severity of his features, revealing a weariness she had never noticed before. "There is something you must understand," he began, and the tone of his voice wrapped around her like a velvet shroud. "Our arrangement, though necessary, is built upon fragile foundations." She nodded, though confusion furrowed her brow. The Duke's gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked windows as though the past lay somewhere beyond them. "I have been deceived before," he continued. "Not by circumstance, but by affection. I once trusted a woman who adored only my title, not the flawed man beneath it." His jaw tightened, the memory clearly a wound unhealed. Evelyn felt the anguish beneath his composed exterior, a quiet ache that resonated with something buried deep within her. She folded her hands in her lap, willing them not to tremble. "I understand betrayal," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. The Duke looked at her sharply, as though her words had shifted the very air between them. "My former suitor found me lacking," she said. "He sought brilliance, vivacity, a woman who would dazzle the room. I was merely myself." The confession felt like stepping barefoot onto frozen ground. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, the firelight tracing the planes of his face. "Then he was a fool," he said, each syllable deliberate, as though he meant her to carry the words with her long after the night ended. Evelyn lowered her gaze, unsure whether gratitude or disbelief threatened more fiercely to unravel her. The storm surged, rattling the window panes, mirroring the tumult inside her chest. The Duke's voice gentled. "You are more than you believe, Miss Harcourt. The world simply lacks the vision to perceive it." A silence followed, not strained but heavy with what neither dared to name. Evelyn felt her heartbeat slow into something deeper, steadier, as though the Duke's presence had carved out a sanctuary within her fear. He rose then, retrieving a music box from a nearby shelf, its mahogany surface gleaming. "This belonged to my mother," he said, winding it gently. "She taught me the waltz using its tune." The melody floated through the room, delicate and trembling, like a memory reborn. He extended his hand. "May I?" Evelyn hesitated only a moment before placing her fingers in his. The touch was light, almost tentative, yet it sent a warmth coursing through her that defied the storm's chill. He guided her into the center of the room, their steps cautious at first, as though they tread upon something sacred. The music wove around them, coaxing their movements into harmony. She felt the subtle strength in his hand at her waist, the careful precision of his guidance, and the unspoken promise that he would not let her falter. As they turned in slow circles, Evelyn sensed his guard lowering, the composed Duke yielding to the man who hid behind caution and memory. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her pulse race and her breath unsteady. "This is dangerous," he murmured, though his tone carried no true warning. "Not the dance," he added. "The understanding it invites." Her lips parted to speak, but the words failed her. The truth was too fragile, too newly discovered, to survive the space between them. He slowed their steps until they stood nearly motionless in the center of the room. The music faded to a whisper, continuing only in soft, chiming breaths. Evelyn felt the trembling quiet press around them, the kind of silence that demanded honesty. "I fear," he said at last, "that in protecting myself from affection, I have become a stranger to it." His voice was raw enough to unravel her composure. She swallowed, her heart an aching, urgent thing. "You are not alone in that," she whispered. The Duke's breath caught, as though her confession had pierced some final layer of his restraint. He released her only enough to study her face, his expression shifting with a depth that unsettled her courage. The fire crackled, the melody dwindled, and the storm outside grew quieter, as if the world were holding its breath. "Evelyn," he said softly, tasting her name as though it were a secret, "there is something I have not told you." Her heart lurched at the gravity in his voice, yet she forced herself to meet his gaze. He hesitated, a rare vulnerability flickering across his features. "The woman who once betrayed me," he continued, "has returned to London." The words fell between them like a blade, sharp enough to sever the fragile peace they had begun to claim. The chandeliers of Winthorpe Hall blazed with a brilliance that seemed almost celestial, casting their golden light over a sea of faces hungry for spectacle. Evelyn felt the weight of every gaze as she descended the marble staircase on the Duke of Ashbourne's arm, her breath tight with anticipation and dread in equal measure. The hall's polished floor shimmered like frozen water, mirroring the restless swirl of dancers who moved with the ease of those born to admiration. Yet even among such shimmering chaos, the Duke's presence carved a clear passage, as though the crowd parted instinctively in acknowledgment of his silent authority. Evelyn, adorned in the gown he had arranged for her, a deep green silk that traced every movement like a whispered promise, walked as though in a dream she feared to wake from. The orchestra struck a new chord, swelling with festive exuberance, but Evelyn heard little beyond the rhythm of her own pulse. She glimpsed familiar faces, many belonging to those who once dismissed her, now assessing her with urgent curiosity. It was odd, she thought, how swiftly disdain could transform into fascination when proximity to a duke was involved. Yet she felt no triumph. Only the strange trembling awareness that her life was being rewritten in real time, every glance and murmur reshaping her place in the world. The Duke's hand rested lightly over hers, steadying her, though she sensed the tension beneath his composed exterior. He was not a man accustomed to vulnerability in public, and tonight required more of it than either had anticipated. As they neared the center of the ballroom, a soft hush swept through the space, and Evelyn recognized the reason at once. The Duke's former beloved, Lady Seraphina Morland, stood near the foot of the dais, her beauty sharpened by a glare that could have shattered crystal. Draped in crimson velvet and diamonds that glinted like shards of ice, Seraphina looked every inch the woman who once believed herself destined to be a duchess. Her lips curved in a smile too brittle to disguise the storm gathering behind it. "Your Grace," she said as they approached, her voice dripping polite venom. "How swiftly the season changes. I confess myself astonished to hear of your engagement. Miss Harcourt, was it? Truly, a revelation." Evelyn inclined her head, summoning the poise she'd practiced, though fire licked at her nerves. Before she could answer, the Duke spoke with a calm that drew stares. "Indeed, Lady Seraphina, a revelation to many, and yet a certainty to me." His tone carried a firmness that Evelyn had never heard directed at another woman, and it left Seraphina's smile faltering. "Some unions," he continued, "are forged not from convenience, but from character." A murmur rippled through the watchers, hungry for conflict. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "And yet whispers suggest the engagement is rather sudden," she said. "One might almost believe it an invention." The Duke's chest rose with a measured breath, and Evelyn sensed the moment teetering on the brink of scandal. Before she could speak, he took her hand, not with the politeness of a performance, but with a certainty that made her heartbeat stutter. "If she is an invention," he said, voice carrying through the hall, "then she is the finest creation I have ever known." Gasps fluttered like startled birds. Evelyn felt the tremor of his sincerity, the world her witness. Something fragile and immense unfurled within her, as though the walls she had built for protection could no longer hold. The orchestra resumed abruptly, attempting to mask the tension. The Duke guided Evelyn onto the dance floor, and the moment their bodies aligned, the world softened to a distant hum. His hand at her waist was steady, warm, and dangerously real. "Forgive the spectacle," he murmured as they turned through the waltz's graceful pattern. "It was necessary." "Necessary," she echoed, though it felt anything but impersonal. Each movement brought them closer, their breaths mingling, their gazes locking with a gravity she no longer believed she could resist. She wondered if he felt the same pull, the same slow unraveling of defenses. When the final note of the waltz faded, the hall erupted into applause more rapturous than any directed toward Evelyn in her life. She felt dazed, transformed, as though the dance had lifted her into an orbit she had never imagined reachable. Yet she could sense the Duke's growing restlessness, a storm gathering beneath the veneer of control. "Come," he said softly, guiding her through the gilded archway toward the winter garden. Snow drifted beyond the glass panes, glowing silver in the moonlight, and the air in the quiet passageway pulsed with unspoken meaning. Once they stepped into the crisp night, The fragrance of pine and frost wrapped around them, sealing them in solitude. The Duke released her hand slowly, as though reluctance tugged at his fingers. "Miss Harcourt," he began, his voice uncharacteristically strained, "there is something I must tell you, something that may alter everything you believe about this arrangement." Evelyn's breath caught. She sensed the truth coiled within him, waiting to break free like a confession too long restrained. The snow continued to fall, delicate and silent, as though the world itself held its breath for his next words. He stepped closer, his breath faintly visible in the cold, his eyes shadowed with something perilously close to vulnerability. "I have broken a promise I made to myself long ago," he said, each word deliberate, as though pulled from a place he had kept sealed. "I vowed I would never again allow my heart to entangle itself with illusion or hope, yet standing beside you tonight, I found that vow crumbling." Evelyn felt the world tilt, every beat of her heart echoing in her ears. He exhaled slowly, as though surrendering. "Before this night is over, you deserve to know the truth I have tried to deny. What I feel for you is no fiction, no ruse, and it is becoming impossible to contain." Snowfall. The snow clung to Evelyn's lashes, delicate as lace, yet her pulse carried her inexorably toward the Duke, whose confession still lingered in the frigid air between them. Moonlight pooled across the winter garden, illuminating frost-laden branches that arched overhead like the ribs of some ancient cathedral. She felt suspended between terror and wonder, unable to step back into the woman she had been only moments before. The Duke's eyes held hers with quiet desperation, as though he feared she might vanish into the drifting snow if he dared to blink. "Evelyn," he murmured, each syllable weighted with a promise yet unspoken. "I have concealed too much, but tonight I can no longer hide behind duty." His breath wavered in the cold, forming a ghostly mist. She felt the unguarded truth in his struggle, the vulnerability he had spent years mastering into silence. She stepped closer, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots, her gloved fingers trembling as though betraying the courage in her chest. "Your Grace," she whispered, "you speak as though this truth pains you." He let out a quiet, broken laugh. "It does. It threatens the foundation of everything I have built. But the greater torment would be denying it further." Snowflakes clung to the dark fabric of his coat as he continued. "I fear I have begun to cherish you beyond the boundaries of our arrangement, and I fear, too, that such feeling may burden you." Evelyn's chest tightened, a mixture of fear and longing flooding her senses. Every slight she had endured, every cruel whisper she had heard, now melted into insignificance under the warmth radiating from his eyes. "It does not burden me," she said softly. "It frightens me, yes, but not for the reasons you imagine." He searched her face, uncertainty and hope mingling in the storm-gray depths of his gaze. "Then why?" he asked. Evelyn inhaled deeply, tasting the cold air and the courage that had blossomed within her. "Because I have longed to be worthy of admiration, of being chosen. When you speak so, I fear I might awaken to find it was all illusion." His eyes softened, the storm within them calming at last. "Nothing about you is illusion," he said, reaching for her hand with a gentleness that reverberated through her entire being. "What I feel is the most unguarded truth I have dared in years." The lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows across the frost-glittered ground. Evelyn felt her heart rise like a fragile flame, buoyed by a warmth that defied the winter around them. He stepped closer, and she sensed the tension in the air shifting, charged with possibility. "If I could undo the rule I set between us," he murmured, "I would. I crafted it to protect myself, yet it has only revealed how deeply I long to break it." Her breath caught in her throat. "Then break it," she whispered. "If your heart calls you to, break it." His exhale shivered through the cold. Surrendering to the truth that had pursued him relentlessly, he dropped to one knee, the snow yielding softly beneath him. Evelyn's eyes widened, her breath forming tiny clouds as she stared at the man she had come to admire more deeply than she could have imagined. The Duke looked up at her with reverence and resolve, a gaze that pierced to the marrow of her soul. "Evelyn Harcourt," he said, "I ask not for pretense, nor for protection, nor for convenience. I ask for you. If you will accept me, let the world know that I am yours in earnest, bound by devotion." The moment stretched, the night itself holding its breath. Evelyn pressed her trembling hand to her lips, every fear she had nurtured dissolving in the gravity of his sincerity. Never had she imagined herself the recipient of such profound and unshakable admiration. "Yes," she whispered, the word fragile yet resolute. "Yes, I accept you." Relief and joy collided across the Duke's features as he rose, gathering her into his arms with a tenderness that unraveled all her remaining doubts. The kiss he pressed to her forehead was at once vow and surrender, sealing their bond in a way no society could contest. She leaned into him, feeling the rhythm of his heart sink with her own. The wind whispered through the branches overhead, carrying their promise into the quiet night, as if nature itself celebrated their union. When they returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, the murmurs of society fell away. The Duke paused at the threshold, scanning the crowd not with caution, but with pride. Evelyn felt the shift immediately. She was no longer the overlooked wallflower but a woman claimed by love chosen freely, untainted by pretense or obligation. He guided her into the brilliance of the chandeliers, which blazed like constellations newly born. The orchestra resumed, swelling with triumphant fanfare, as though heralding the transformation of two lives once governed by restraint into a union born of courage and devotion. But as they stepped onto the dance floor, a footman hurried forward, bowing with urgency. "Your Grace," he panted, "there is a matter demanding immediate attention. Something has occurred at Ashbourne Manor." The Duke's hand tightened around Evelyn's, his expression sharpening with sudden concern. Silence rippled through the crowd, anticipation coiling tightly in the space. Evelyn felt the air shift, tension slicing through the warmth of their triumph. Whatever awaited them beyond Winthorpe Hall would test the promise they had only just spoken into existence. The Duke's gaze met hers, resolve forging anew. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." And as the doors opened to the icy night beyond, Evelyn sensed their story had only just entered its fiercest chapter, a tempest that would demand all the courage, love, and trust they had finally discovered in one another.